All right, here we go. That is active. So let's get started. Set all this up. Synchronize these two, both live. Dismiss. That's already muted. All right, and everything is up and ready using the bathymetric world map viewer instead of Google Earth because Google Earth lags out the stream constantly. Have all the bookmarks ready. And for those here early enough, I'm bringing back Max's music recommendations since they happen to be on screen at the moment. These three pieces right here, really, really decent music. Really, especially the Weight of Rain from the Tunic soundtrack has ironically given its name, has a decent amount of what is it? Atmospheric and emotional setting weight to it, but never actually played or had anything to do with the Halo games. But there is a fair amount of decent music composition from them. Now we can jump from there over here to have this ready. Shut up, advertisement to the free access drive whenever that subject ends up coming up. Let me drink some water. So we supposedly already have 6 people. Should be short this time since everything is predominantly just Iran stuff. Not much else of enough significance happened elsewhere within my purview of things that I would speak about anyways. Hello to everybody who is here. Let me think. Was there anything minor I can go over real quick while we wait like another minute or two for enough people to show up? Uh, Tunisia's water situation was able to get some updates on that. So their total fill rate, the total volume of their dam supply across all their reservoirs, did has continued going lower. At its peak in summer 3 years ago, it got up to like 37 or 38. Uh, and then in 2024, it got up to like 36. And this past summer in 2025, it only got up to about 33 and is back down now to somewhere in the mid 20s in percentile. Although it has not yet any of the preceding years surpassed the all-time low of only 18% full that it hit back in 2023. But we will see if something of the sort comes about. But not as bad of a, or I guess it's a bit, it's not as decent of a direct comparison as Iraq's reservoirs are probably now down to only 7% full, but Iraq does have the water, the flowing water from the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, whereas Tunisia doesn't really have any such thing. So completely emptying out its stored reservoir water will hurt Iraq, but it won't like suddenly drop Iraq to a water supply of zero. The damage to Iran, the primary subject country of the stream, obviously from depleting its groundwater will actually be a heavier hit on their part than Iraq's dam reservoirs running out will on them. But Tunisia would comparatively, scaling everything percentage wise, take the worst hit from its dam reservoirs reaching zero because Tunisia has basically nothing else to work with and would potentially temporarily have to, if any times like that ever actually occurred, like what was being discussed to do for South Africa for Cape Town if day zero actually appeared, but they ended up avoiding that. Praise God. Uh, Tunisia would have to start receiving literal, instead of oil tankers, water tankers from benefactor countries, from countries willing to send such. All right, everybody should be here now. Let's see, bubble. A lot of places have been seized, and a lot of stuff has fallen. It there was a bunch of uncertainty at first, but even a lot of otherwise would-be cautious governments have even publicly began saying that they think it's looking pretty clear, like this is the end this time. So to start with, yeah, the internet media blackout has now been going on for over 5 days, and we're having to get information like the way uh, VHS tapes were smuggled out of Eastern European countries in during the Cold War. We're having to get people smuggling memory cards and or spoofing their phones to an Iraqi SIM card and uploading data to the internet near the Iraqi border once they're close enough to bounce off of a cell tower in Iraq. As the Iranian government has cut off all outflowing and inflowing information, except for themselves, obviously. But we passed the hundreds of thousands point and are likely in the millions of participants in the protests slash uprising point, and are now well past the point of it being worthwhile to like mention any specific cities or whatever, because now it's quite literally every city. Like, this here was the uprising map as of, and that was as of yesterday. And the only parts you can really see is like out here, which is kind of like uh, the actual empty parts of Iran. They're up here. There's supposedly not a lot going on, or there wasn't until today, because stuff is now happening in Tabriz, which is one of the capitals of the Azeri region, but also might just not be getting that much stuff out of that particular region, as that's along with the Kurds and the Balochs down here. That's one of the minority group areas where they have to go heavy-handed on the most, even before any of this started. But make sure volume's down so the mic doesn't pick that up. But yeah, it's burning, burning, all burning. They've been storming everything, government cities, security force bases. They've they've been overrunning stuff, burning everything. That's Russia. That's Russia. This is Iran. There is footage for those who want proof of like all the deaths. There is footage of the stacked bodies and everything, with gunshot wounds and grenade shrapnel wounds because they're throwing grenades at the protesters now. There is footage that, for TOS reasons, obviously I can't show on stream, but there is footage and or photos of like stacks and stacks of bodies. So it is continuing, and we are in a gray zone where we have no way to confirm the actual specific numbers. The Iranian government has admitted to some. They've willingly admitted that close to 3,000 civilians are dead, and admitted that 200 of their security forces or military personnel are dead, which is a bit surprising and actually kind of a bad look to admit to, that you've been overrun even that much. The highest statements have been that as many as 12K civilians as of a few hours ago are dead, and that something like close to 1,000 security personnel are dead. The most likely middle ground that's come out from not completely neutral, I guess, but third party enough assessments is it's looking like 8 to 9 thousand regular citizens are dead, and possibly around 500 security personnel. As remember, this is not like the previous times. This is not the protesters marching, getting shot. I can't draw an AK, so we're just going to pretend this is an AK. Getting shot and then just running away. They This became the moment where, after the gunfire started, they just kept charging forward. And so they've overrun the security dudes in countless areas and have just taken the weapons. And so now, although in outside of Tehran and Isfahan, the heaviest actual fighting against them has been in the Kurdish areas and the Balochistan areas. But the participants of the uprising are actually fighting against the internal security force. They're not just protesting, like shouting slogans and then running away as soon as a few of them start getting shot. So the Iranian government has kind of seemingly started to abandon attempts to like clamp down on, I guess maybe you could call them outer areas, and has pulled inward and is like consolidating security fortifications around like key areas of the bigger cities, and obviously uh, around the oil infrastructure, the thing they care about the most. Let's see, am I forgetting anything? Oh, yeah, everybody has one by one over the last 3 nights, everybody has begun pulling out. Everyone who operates embassies in Iran or has any decently known number of their own citizens in Iran, everybody from Europeans to Asian nations, African, South American nations, uh, surrounding their own fellow Persian Gulf members, everybody has begun shutting down and evacuating their embassies, and also pulling out as many of their own citizens from the country as they can, which is usually a decently heavy indicator that those who have access to such assessments and information are pretty convinced that this is the end and that it's going to tip over. Now, as for outside intervention, the U.S. has continued stating that it's considering doing stuff. What exactly that would entail is not yet known, but the initial what probably would have been preferred before all of this started, and this all of this would have been like one of the preferred outcomes of doing the second massive air campaign. But we're now, uh, on both Israel and the US's part, we're now kind of at a point where it's already gone where the aim was likely to try to tip it over into going. So now decision makers are kind of stuck in a point of like debating whether to just sit back and let the uprising continue and hope it completely goes into overthrow revolution and just let it entirely play out on its own, or whether to not take the risk that the regime might be able to muster enough force to put it down completely, in which case, this time around, any kind of bombings and airstrikes would almost certainly be on Revolutionary Guard bases specifically, not even regular military personnel, and the specifically the internal security enforcers or whatever their specific division is called, as doing anything beyond and outside of that would likely not be taken all and draw up more angry eyes, would likely not be taken all that well by the citizenry itself, even though they are trying to overthrow their current government. That would kind of be seen as what it would really be if, again, if anything other than that was struck. Like if we just started striking all of their air bases or their naval stuff or the oil and gas infrastructure, that would be interpreted as exactly what it would be, which would be a really opportunistic, opportunistic mob hit to use a moment of weakness to cripple any lingering capabilities that they have, even if even though a more friendly Iranian government might them be able to control and use in our favor in the future. So there's a significantly high likelihood that A, we're going to kind of hang back as long as it seems like momentum is in their favor and just let them keep going. Or if we do actually hit anything, it's again primarily going to be specifically Revolutionary Guard stuff and the internal security enforcement brigades or whatever. And we had uh, usual the usual kind of expectation, have sort of the quaking boots, cowardly begging from the richer Persian Gulf nations, which were, regardless of what anyone may or may not be intending to do, have been asking the U.S. and Israel to please don't do anything because they're terrified of being on the receiving end of some kind of retaliation. Let's see. Same thing else I'm forgetting. All right, that's go. Saw that. Saw that. blah blah blah. Those are Russian tankers. Uh, those are Russian soldiers who think Metal Gear Solid 3 is real life. More stuff burning. Is there anything I'm specifically forgetting about development wise? Make sure play. Make sure you're muted though. But yeah, uh, you can see, and there's the security forces down there. But turn back this way from where the crowd is coming, you can see end to end, street to street, sea of humans. So this has tipped over the initial stages of what it began as. Some of them and some of them have begun. This might be related to any expectations they have of a potential intervention. They've begun very visibly tagging and marking buildings that are like not publicly stated to be security force buildings, but are being used by them as like barracks for staging them in the cities, and have also been tagging and marking the houses of a lot of the regime's members and politicians and stuff. That was all that. Blah blah blah. Iranian leaders insist it's not Iranians doing the protesting. All those hundreds of thousands now in the millions of people that are participating, they're all CIA agents and they're all Mossad members because the CIA and Mossad have like infinite cloning facilities or something. That like most of that's just going down through more footage and stuff further back. I thought there was other like really specific things that I was forgetting about, but it doesn't look like it. Supposedly, the highest members of the government do have a contingency plan to flee to Moscow if necessary, where they'll go, I don't know, play FIFA on the PS5 with Assad or something. Assuming, despite the fact we've seen no actual proof of life, assuming Assad is actually alive and hiding in Moscow. Let's see, what could be it? Blah blah blah. Fix their water situation. Not that much as we their pipeline distribution network is not bad, but it's also not the best. It's kind of like median. So if they did like a national overhaul and revamp of it and got a much more modernized near zero leaks, zero losses system, then they could probably reduce their agricultural water usage by like 20%, or technically not usage, I guess demand. The total amount that ends up leaving through the pipeline network out of the groundwater reservoirs, because some a bit of it gets lost along the way. That could cut them down by a little bit, and I guess they could. The only other like option they would have is trying to just reduce reduce overall water usage elsewhere, which they, which they already do, not in the best ways. They're doing it in ways that make their citizens angry, which is the rotating water access blackouts method. This block gets access for these 2 hours. This block gets access for these 2 hours. This block gets water supply for these 2 hours. That's not the best method because that kind of just ends up with people either a using the same amount of water just all in a very specific and narrow window of time, or using more water than they otherwise would have because they're trying to like cool it into a tub or a bucket to have extra for the hours that they don't have access during. So if you did like gradual usage reduction methods outside of fixing the distribution pipeline system, like maybe you could shave some off, but it's just not enough. As Iran has a population close to 90 million. They're not actually at 90 million, but they're close, so we'll put a downwards arrow there. And all the lands that they can use for agriculture, they are using. And in total, as long as it has a water supply, that supplies about 75 million people's worth of food. So they're at a shortfall already of 15 million, which is why they have to import. Their imports come already predominantly from Russia across the Caspian Sea. The only other real thing that could cut them back would be if they just reduced the amount of food they grow deliberately before just running out of the available groundwater. However, again, that same outcome is just going to happen from depleting the groundwater. So they're not really there's no actual win for Iran in this situation. There's no win for Iraq either in their situation, nor really is there a win for Tunisia unless they just suddenly start getting as much rain as they used to. Speaking about Tunisia specifically, the only other thing that could be done regarding the water situation, as mentioned, was building a bajillion desalination plants, which would require tremendous additional power generation capacity in the like dozens of extra gigawatts would have to be conjured up out of nowhere really quick to power those desalination plants. And then that would further ecological damage to, in this case, the Persian Gulf. As remember, the salinity balance in any body of water, whether a whole ocean or a localized sea, it's used to fresh water flowing into it at whatever rate X is. And you using some of like, the water from river ABC and river XYZ along the way, and then running it through a water treatment plant afterwards, wastewater treatment, to remove all the human stuff out of it before letting it flow back down the river. That's not introducing extra fresh water. That's the same amount that would have otherwise gone there. Some of it just went out through a human loop first. Desalination is actually sucking extra salt water out of a saltwater system, removing the salt from it, and then forcibly it gets sent back eventually through the flows and everything as fresh water, with which then messes with the localized salinity at least, which is part of the problem with people suggesting, for example, with the even bigger, hundreds of millions of people's worth of water issue situations coming up in India's future, of can't India just build like 10,000 desalination plants and just suck all the salt water out of the Indian Ocean? hyperbolic. That would take a few hundred millennia and would take humanity expending it all of its resources and concentrated effort to actually do that in particular. But on a localized level, extracting and then redumping a whole bunch of water out as fresh water that was supposed to remain salt water would again, in this case, also cause localized salinity issues, which would mess with the ecology of the system. So overall, regarding the Iran water situation question, there are some things that can be done, but they would not do that much. Like they would lessen the blow by a bit, but it is still going to be pretty bad and pretty severe, even if you did do this. Now, they're not doing this because this would take time. You would have had to start fixing the whole system long beforehand, before we got to the point where the first aquifer depletions are like only a couple years away, like not even 2030, but before that, you would have had to have start fixing a nationwide pipeline system long before this point. And also now they're kind of a bit busy having a revolution. So no, there is no real out from this scenario. Although potentially the aftermath of this, like with any overthrow, collapse, etc., the aftermath of this might, result in some decent amount of Iranians leaving to go elsewhere. I mean, there are plenty of Iranians who have been, unable, prevented from leaving for whether a few years if they're younger, decades if they're older, who as soon as like the doors were actually open would probably jump at the opportunity to leave. But whether they will actually do so or have the ability to do so is unknown. And even at that point, their numbers would probably only be like a couple million, so it wouldn't really chop that much off. Like it would chop the population from 88, say, down to like 86, maybe at the highest estimates of how many people might want to immigrate out as soon as that's something they actually are allowed to do again. Okay, back to oh man, you guys were all over the place. All right, I'm gonna have to scroll all the way back up here. Let's see. Yeah, that someone already I forgot the exact phrasing, but someone already phrased it in a way that this time seems to be turning out different because this time it's not in reaction to like a woman, like one woman being executed in the subway because her hijab fell off, or back in 2009, the president at the time, Ahmadinejad or whatever his name is, insisted he won the election because the Iranian regime pretends to have elections, that he like got 100% of the vote, and he was like all smiley and happy when he said that, and that got everybody really angry, and that was when the big 2009 protests happened. In the past, because everything could go back to normal the next day, they got away with like, shooting a few thousand people and everyone just kind of quieted down and went home. Now they're in a situation where you can't just murder your way out of it because you can shoot at a mob of protesters, but that's not going to make them run away anymore, as they've proven. Because yeah, here's AK-47 guy. This is an AK-47. Just pretend. Here's the fire from it firing. Uh, you can shoot at them, But if they're just going to continue wave charging you and overrunning you each time, then you can't rely on that as a tactic anymore. And the only other thing you can do at that point is do what Muammar Gaddafi did in Libya and send out attack helicopters to start like literally, literally bombing the streets while people are in them, which tends to not work because that tends to just put people into the martyrdom mentality of, oh, well, we're going to die anyways. So why not make sure, why don't we die make suring that you go to hell? So, but also, you can't murder your way out of the problem this time because this time the reason everyone has gotten so angry and is out in the streets is that their currency collapsed into worthlessness. Inflation has been a factor of 2x in that over just actually less than the last 2 years, everything in Iran from rent prices to fuel prices to food prices has increased in cost by 2 times or more, while their pay has only been increased by about 20%. So, you know, you can imagine for yourself whether you pay rent or mortgage, and then any other prices, gasoline, food prices that you yourself pay, and all your other like bills or whatever. If everything just doubled from whatever number you're used to, and your pay was literally not brought up to parity with it, uh, it's an actually unlivable situation. And remember from the last stream, the president in Tehran addressed the nation and said he understands their plight, but his literal response to the economic situation they're facing was, well, what do you expect me to do about it? So I'm going to let you in on a secret. That response was not well received by the population. Hence the fact that everything has now been set on fire. As the as far back as every revolution, usually everyone pulls the French and Russian revolutions out as like the most prevalent examples. When when the serfs, when when the serfs, when the peasants can no longer afford even the most basic flavorless 5 calorie slice of bread, then there's nothing that's going to continue holding them back because there is no previously they could just hide at the bottom of the quality of life barrel and still survive. But now, when there's no more bottom to the quality of life barrel, when they would not be able to at least still survive, there's no more barrier to them continuing. Let's see. Yeah, the whether or not regarding the independence question, whether or not they get recognized by the UN or whatever, because that's the usual standard, is irrelevant in terms of functional and or at the very least self-declared. Yes, the Balochistan region will absolutely break. In fact, they've verbally and by action. Remember, they've been fighting for the last 2 years. They've been fighting off the security forces there for the last 2 years. It's just gotten really more intense now that the whole country is burning. But Balochistan has made it pretty clear to not just Iran, but also Afghanistan and Pakistan that they're out of all three, that they want to be their own actual thing now. Now, neither the Iranian government or the Taliban or the Pakistani government, none of them accept that answer, obviously. But they've been finding out that the Balochs are, after all these decades, apparently willing to truly stand their ground and die if need be. They're not going to remain, as the chatter below that person in chat said, they're not going to stick with, they're not going to go back to the status quo anymore, no matter how many of them you kill. Uh, Kurdistan, that one's a bit more tricky. Uh, Kurdistan in Iraq and Syria is like functionally separate. They're basically in regards to those two at least, they are effectively a country, kind of in the same way that Scotland and Wales are are different countries from England. They're all united as a singular UN recognized political entity known as the United Kingdom. However, within the United Kingdom, England, Wales, and Scotland are different countries with like different legal systems and laws and everything. The primary like overarching thing they have is that you can travel freely, obviously, between England, Wales, and Scotland, and they have a singular unified military. But like they have their own separate parliaments and everything. Uh, with regarding like the Kurdish situation, for Iraq and the Syria portions, it's kind of like the same setup in that Iraq is still a singular thing, and on paper, on the map, Kurdistan is still, at least this part is still like a part of Iraq, but it's pretty separate to the degree, to like the Scotland and Wales degree, basically, or the Srpska and Bosnia degree internally, to where functionally these are two separate nations. I don't know if the Kurds in Iran will want to just go with the same thing, because the others might not want them to, because they might not like the idea they'll initially have of like these borders here, these borders, you can't just go between Iraq and Iran, but you can go between Iranian, Syrian, and Iraqi Kurdistan because Kurdistan uh, wants to operate itself as one entity. And from there, you could then just like go into Iran, even if you weren't allowed to go into Iran through the Iranian Iraqi border. So that would be messy for everybody involved. But in terms of whether the Kurdish people want it, yes, they absolutely do. They might, for the time being, accept a similar scenario to the Iraq and Syria setup, but down the road, at least, not talking about like this year or whatever, or whenever everything shatters in Iran, down the road, no one is actually going to escape Kurdistan finally getting to exist. No matter how much everybody wants to, especially in the Middle Eastern region, you're not getting away from that. And I'm not sorry that you're not getting away from that. Yeah, I think this is roughly Kurdistan in its totality. It's the northern, it's the northern 25% of Iraq, the northeastern like 15% of Syria, the southeastern like 8 or 7% of Turkey, and then this little chunk of Iran. Balochistan will be breaking off, or at the very least trying to. Uh, I would not I would not place your bets on whatever new Iranian government forms not trying to combat that and stop them from being able to functionally leave. Whether they're able to recoalesce themselves enough to have a severe enough force to actually stop them will remain to be seen. But also remember there is the Azeri portion. This whole area up here is predominantly Azeris. There's actually more Azeris in the Azeri region of Iran than there is in Azerbaijan itself. They will almost certainly at least want to leave, if not uh, have a near separation similar again to like what Kurdistan does in Iraq and Syria. But they're going to eventually down the line want to unite with Azerbaijan, which will cause issues because then Azerbaijan has this whole new pool to pull from and is going to continue further prepping for their eventual attempt to annihilate Armenia from existence. But that's down the road where the colloquial tin, but in reality steel, because the cans were always steel, they were not tin, can has rolled down. Let me drink some water. We've been going for longer than I was expecting to 46 minutes. Ugh. But yeah, they uh Turkey would almost certainly prefer the Azeri region to break off because Azerbaijan is uh not Azerbaijan is not their puppets, but they're essentially their passenger seat tag along. And also that would, cut Iran itself off from bordering Turkey. Israel wants Iran to go down. Saudi Arabia wants Iran to go down because they consider them a rival because Saudi Arabia likes to, I'll draw a clown face, I guess, curly hair, big nose, little eyes. Saudi Arabia likes to pretend that they're like a powerful country, but literally everyone that matters in the region, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, everybody wants Iran to drop, the current Iran at least. The only one who wants Iran to stick around is ironically Russia, but Russia can't exactly do anything. And even the Russia that existed before the past 4 years of the Ukraine war has kind of proven it wasn't really that capable of doing the kind of things we thought it was to begin with. So, blah blah blah. Yeah, I uh partially they did partially really hold on. I keep getting that like rising up in your throat, like you feel like you're gonna hiccup, but then nothing happens. All it does is like constrain you from talking. They did restrict themselves to like only targeting like some, or sorry, not Bahrain, Qatar, some really specific locales because they were afraid of hitting things that might be a bit more important and then coming on the receiving end of the kind of retaliation that would result in. So they were visibly aware of the like lack of their own capability to fight anything off that came back in their direction. Partially because a lot of their stuff is Russian, and they kind of, saw how well Russian equipment performed now that that's been on display for the whole world. So for one, they did not have the highest level of trust in their air defense systems. So they definitely wanted to avoid drawing too much back on themselves because they were well aware that they would probably fail to repel anything, and also they'd already figured at this point that you can't detect the F-35 because remember before the 12-day war, Israel had already bombed Iran a few times using the F-35s, and they weren't able to see anything. So the F-35 was another like example of a really well run long term psyop where we ourselves, the U.S., via media, via popular culture, via military themselves, even running like very publicized testimonies before congressional committees, talked about all these problems and these overruns and these horrible defects, and constantly hyped down the F-35 as like this absolutely horrible, ineffective thing that was going to be a waste of money and worthless. And it has turned out it's actually one of the most effective and astounding pieces of equipment or weapons platforms that we've ever managed to crank out. That was a one of several like really good examples of an actual psyop, or at least a psyop that was well run. One of the best indicators of a of something being a like hardcore psyop that was well run, especially, is did you yourself at some point in your life believe it? Because I believed that for a while, and then the truth started revealing itself, and then had to do the little cinema clap, be like, all right, defense intelligence apparatus, good psyop, good job. That was very well executed. Okay, that was the question I already asked. uh yeah, I people, since someone said that in chat on screen that about the Gaza stuff and the initial start of the 2023 conflict. I will actually press X to doubt on that having been supposedly like on orders from Iran, because Iran for the most part has actually been more reserved and competent than most of the other actors, and they, with the exception of now, because now they're in a corner regarding the uprising against them. But like doing the really, like especially when you continue seeing all the really lo-fi or low key call to warn the target ahead of time, like 2 days ahead of time, missile attacks whenever they do stuff. They've kind of retroactively proven that they were aware of their inadequacy from the beginning, and that they don't actually, or at least the present version of Iran in like the last number of years, maybe the immediately post-revolution Iran, like in the 80s and 90s, was pretty like frothing at the mouth and would just do stuff, like jump right out of the gate. Modern Iran, although remaining antagonistic against the U.S., the West, other Gulf nations, and a huge chunk of the world at large, with a few exceptions like Russia and everybody's favorite party buddy North Korea, they've been really restrained because they seem to have, now looking back on it, been aware that A, they're not capable of that much, and B, they would not be able to withstand that much either. Like their best bet for defeating the US in any regard would be primarily a Vietnam-esque like grind down until we decide to leave victory, which would only be a thing if we like literally invaded Iran, like on the ground occupying force pushed into the country, which was really not something that was ever on the table because Iran is not Iraq. They have the same they have like, the same Russian equipment, slightly more modern versions of it that like Iraq did in the 90s and the early 2000s. But again, not being flat, not being able to just plain sweep blitzkrieg, and also the fact that uh, the Iranians, if we invaded them, would actually like really try to fight back. But that, like, an actual invasion and grind down scenario would have been their only real like chance, and they seem to know that, since everything else where they risked starting an air war, they were always again really hesitant about it, and really like restrained with what they actually decided to do. Granted, the restraint didn't always work because eventually in June of last year, we and the IDF still did end up launching an air campaign against them anyways. But despite Hamas being a proxy for Iran, like just like Hezbollah and a lot of other organizations, people tend to give a bit too much weight to the puppet string regarding what proxy forces are, as they do act on behalf of other of like higher powers when called to do so, but they're not like literally zombie puppets on strings. Even groups that we refer to as proxy forces do operate like with their own autonomy a lot of the time, and they remain proxy forces, uh, or remain considered proxy forces of whatever power they're beholden to, despite acting autonomously, because usually, that's the caveat, usually what they do, even on their own, is still beneficial to whoever the higher power they answer to is. In this case, it kind of ended up backfiring and was not beneficial. Uh, ooh, dang, you guys have been really active. Blah, blah, blah. There's not too many people for freshwater worldwide. There are too many people in specific places, which is why, and maybe I'll try to finally do it this weekend, 4 weeks after I initially said I was going to do it. This is why when I finally do the list off stream of how you yourself on the individual level can help to save the world to some extent stream. One of the biggest things you can do is not live in the desert. Now, again, I understand that a lot of people are born in places that are deserts, and you don't want to leave your country. Obviously, I'm not implying that you should, but if you live in a desert within a country like the US, for example, or like Algeria, uh, and you can move to the part that is not a desert, like in the US, you could move out of Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, etc., to literally anywhere else in the country. Then, yes, it would be beneficial to yourself and to humanity as a whole if you did such a thing. But again, adjusting since it always comes up, no, we don't have a global net total because the world is not all the same overpopulation issue. Issues related to population stress itself specifically are heavily regional, and an extreme amount of that is predominantly in desert regions like Iran. Uh, to use the water from their aquifers and rely on rain and river water at a sustainable level, they would probably need a population closer to like 30 million or less, i.e., the population they had before their population boom started in the their post revolution post Islamic revolution population boom. Iraq used to be good for up to 20 million people. Now, because of degradations to various aspects of things, it's probably only good for 12 to 15. Saudi Arabia should only have 3 to 5 million people at the highest. But currently, Saudi Arabia is at 36 million people. Egypt would probably be good for 30 million, maybe 35 if they were to really efficiency max everything. But Egypt is now up to 109 million, and so on and so forth. Uh, China, China is above the rate. Uh, Obviously, the two, billion plus nations are kind of beyond the sustainability rate in several regards. China has been uh, net total depleting its northern and central land groundwaters for some time. That's kind of why they've been doing all the extra damming and aqueduct pipeline water diversion infrastructure from all the glacier runoff on the Himalayas, which has reduced the amount flowing into India and Bangladesh, and also the amount flowing down into Laos and Vietnam. However, China's situation is kind of already, most of you guys know, on the path to self-correction as they've begun to drop, and their drop is going to be picking up speed to a point where by the at the latest mid 2030s they're going to be dropping like 10 plus million people per year from natural decline, not from like starvation or mass die-offs or anything. India is in a bind because they are not near such a point, and their curve is not going to be anywhere near as steep, and is going to would play out over a longer term if it were not for all the stuff that's going to be happening in 2040 and beyond. But I'm not going to get off in too much of rambling on this one because I want to actually go down through everything that was said here. Let's see. Uh, Lake Mead. Lake Mead has a few years left, as long as long as they don't get either like complete almost zero precipitation years or years where they get like a massive deluge that gives them a refill. The lake levels website doesn't want to load for some reason. Oh no, here it goes. Are we loading? Yeah. Just keep in mind the numbers. It really doesn't want to load, and there's hookers on the side of the screen, so I'm just gonna X off anyways. The number is elevation feet. It's not the depth remaining of the lake, and also we've regardless of what type of measurement form of feet measurement is being used. Remember, these are flooded canyons. They get narrower and narrower the further down you go. They're not a perfectly vertical walled rectangular swimming pool. So each foot of water level further down you go has less volume than the foot above it did. But Lake Mead, if it has normal years, or what has been normal for the last 2.5 decades at least, it has a couple years left before it's going to hit a critical point. And I'm going to resurrect the hashtag I started in the late 2010s of hashtag abandon Vegas. But regarding, I saw someone in chat asking about U.S. aquifers. The Central Plains aquifer system, a lot of it is in the Ogallala, but there's a few others. That was originally that was originally going to run out. Oh, sorry, I should be going in the opposite direction. That was originally going to run out in or start running out around 2060. Because remember, aquifers are layers of porous rock that are storing water that are also not perfect like boxes or rectangular prisms. Uh, their tops, their highest point closest to the surface, and their lower points undulate through different portions of rock layer. You might get random like abyss portions like that. So different sections like would hit quote unquote bottom at different times. But it was going to start hitting critical like bottom out points around 2060. However, that was guessed at around 2000, and a significantly decent uptick in efficiency of irrigation systems and some reworking of pipeline distribution systems from the wells themselves has managed to reduce the amount of water being pumped out for agriculture and other things, and has pushed off at least that likely initial point to around 2080. And there's a bit more that could be done. It wouldn't be some like huge, significant further push, but there's a bit more. But a lot of on a lot of like places, they were still doing the the generic fire extinguisher irrigation type, where the pipelines run along the fields and the thing just like sprays water into the air in huge arcs across the field, and it eventually falls down, but a lot of it kind of evaporates or gets stuck on the leaves of the plants. So everywhere that was still doing that switched over to like the big system where the thing has the wheels and it rolls through the field and has the spigots that come like all the way down, basically right to surface level of the plants, and it just like it basically it's constantly it's used it well, sorry, it's been colloquially I think referred to as drip irrigation, but it's not literally dripping like your faucet. It is still spraying, just not some not like high pressure because it's going directly down on the plants. So obviously not high pressure, but I guess you could call it more like sprinkling, sort of like if you turned your shower head in your shower on at like the lower settings and kind of just like, starts pitter patter raindrops sprinkling out. So there's like zero air room between when the water exits and when it hits the plants in the ground, and also not as much as being sprayed out to begin with, because when using the old generic sprayer system, a lot more had to be sprayed out to begin with because a lot of it would just like turn into vapor and dissipate before reaching the ground. So that was a massive cut down in the amount being used, and that pushed that date off decently into the future. But there there are other further methods that could cut that back by even greater amounts that are not related to the agriculture itself, or sorry, not related to ways that the water is used for the agriculture, but are more in the vein of just not doing things like reducing the amount that's actually grown overall. As grows enough, the U.S. grows enough to feed roughly 700 million people. Currently has a population of 343 million. So a lot of that is exported, and a lot of that also went to food aid programs, which the current administration stopped, which has already resulted in the starvation deaths of at least 1 million people worldwide. The U.S. in total could grow enough to feed about 1 billion people. However, a lot of land is used to grow things for other purposes, like a lot of the viable land along the Colorado River in Arizona, for example, and stretching out this way, is getting used to grow cotton, which is a really water intensive crop, and it's being grown in the middle of the desert. There's a lot of cotton also grown in the more arid regions of Texas, and then basically, I think it's Iowa, but I'm not positive. It's like the entire state of Iowa is used to grow corn that is then used to make corn based ethanol fuel, because we started that whole project during the oil embargo in the 70s to try to see if we could come up with something to supplement ourselves by at least a decent margin. And we've unfortunately just never gotten rid of it. It's turned into it's turned into a, at this point, generational sunk cost fallacy thing that we just keep doing it. So, and the usual, you get framed as a villain for suggesting ending it because everyone will usually argue against you, saying like you'll make 1 million farmers homeless or whatever. Except that's disingenuous because they could and should just grow other crops, like food, like food crops that could then be sold and or post this administration uh, donated, given to people who will die without it. But no, for the moment, we continue using the entire lush agricultural space that is Iowa to grow corn, to turn into corn based ethanol fuel, which has a net energy yield that is barely worth it. It is 1.2 or 1.3 over 1 at best. But again, we're 50 years into a sunk cost fallacy now. Okay, that was another really long term off tangent. Lake Mead. Blah blah blah. Oh, dang. Thank you. That is sudden. I assume that was in the last few seconds. $10. Okay, so that is 10 million people that get to survive the end of the world. As we're expanding the map, the new stupid little project, since back up home on my own, and when I had a quote unquote real job, I survived off of a total amount of living expenses of about 8 grand a year. So I figured on the long quest to get back to such a level of income, there's a little over 8 billion people on the planet. So $1 out of that 8 grand translates to about 1 million people. So ad revenue, monthly Patreon stuff, PayPal and YouTube, super whatever buttons and everything. Everything will translate into some amount of population that I arbitrarily designate will survive the apocalypse. So far, we got Jamaica, Colombia, Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana, Alaska, home, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, Cyprus, Angola, and Namibia getting to survive. Was there anybody else? Nope, that looks like that's it. All right, so 10 million. Where can we grab 10 million people? Let's see. Sweden? No, you guys are 11. Norway and Finland combined both come out to, or combined, they come out to about 11. So you're a bit overshot. Scotland is what, 5.5? Wales is 3.5. So that's 9. You're a bit short. Portugal has 10 million, I think. Tunisia has 12. Gabon has like 5. Oh, I don't know the populations of the South African provinces. Let's see. Panama and Costa Rica both have about 5. So we'll say you two make it. Everybody else sucks to be you. You're all gonna die. All right. Let's see. Yeah. No. They Somalia, or at least some. If Somalian wants to, where did Epic Pen go? Oh, I closed it. No, I didn't. It's right here. Somalia. If Somalia wants to like go the route of growing crops instead of continuing with like vague herdsman pastoralism, uh, fishing, which I mean they stick with fishing. They do get a decent bit of diet from fishing, so that kind of offloads what would otherwise be an agriculture burden. But a lot then still is imports and food assistance donations. If they were to try to start going agricultural on the portions of their land that are viable for agriculture, they might be able to grow enough for 20 million in terms of like basic low requirement cereal crops, but their population is not going to stay at the current 19 million. In Even with their birth rate falling as it is, they're still not going to see population peak until over 50 million somewhere, probably around 60 or 65, assuming nothing happens that makes that suddenly drop. So they would cap out capability wise at like 20 million for agriculture, but there is the issue then obviously of the water. There is not a lot of water in these rivers. I think a few of these are even dry beds. There are aquifers underlying Somalia, but they are not packed with all that much. At a drawing water out of them at a rate that would be able to be replenished by the amount of rainfall that Somalia receives, which is not a lot, except for like one portion of the year where it all comes down and floods and usually kills a few hundred people, would be a very low amount to be getting drawn out each year and would not actively support the maximum capacity of the land, which is about 20 million people worth of agriculture in regards to how much viable agricultural land Somalia has. So no, the water situation for Somalia not is not in the green for supporting things long term. Uh, if they wanted to predominantly do their own mass agriculture, but that's not uh, except when you push things to the limit. Obviously, that's not automatically a death sentence for a nation on the rise, as there are nations that are perfectly fine that are completely dependent on importing food, like Kuwait, Qatar, Dubai. Uh, the little city state of Singapore has zero agriculture, but they do perfectly fine. I promise you. Taiwan relies a lot on imports. It's a lot worse of a shock, and will be a lot worse of a shock in cases like Iran, Iraq, and Tunisia, when you, especially like for a lot of your history, even before the modern day, when you are already set in a way of doing and used to growing everything yourself, and then face an abrupt collapse. That's the scenario where, you get millions dead. Although in some countries like Iraq and Iran, where whatever Iran's future government is can kind of just pay for extra food imports with oil money, you end up, instead of outsourcing labor, you end up, we'll call it outsourcing famine, where you outsource your starvation that you would otherwise experience to other places that can't afford extra food imports or are so embroiled in a civil war between two generals that food imports and medicine just can't even get in the first place. But even that aspect, like rising aside, Somalia is still going to Somalia is still going to hit. Uh, Somalia is still going to eventually be trying to run through some wet cement, purely because of how high up the population count is going to end up going before they actually peak. Which where are they peaking at? Actually, we'll use that as the once per stream caveat. Go over here to any video from the last 2 years, look at the description. You'll find a link to a free access drive. Since every official website is putting things behind paywalls, this is where you can find data and graphs with no paywall. Granted, they don't look the best because they're just me making the graphs in Google Docs, but they are what you have. So, yeah, both fertility rates and population projections graphs. So, in this case, we'll look at Somalia's example. Somalia, yes. So, you can see throughout Somalia was at like 7 for a long time, plunged during the Civil War, came back up, started going down once you hit the 2000s, and have continued on, especially now that they, like everyone else, have internet access. This was from the start of last year. As of the start of this year, Somalia is at a flat 5.0 children per woman, which is still pretty high, but it's not, the 7 that we previously just assumed they were at for the last 30 years. Future population projections. Let me see. I think it was 65. Oh no, looks like 70. You can see there. You can see that it's just starting to curve over into a peak right around 70. And that is was me taking everything into account as it currently stands. So if their birth rate continues declining at the rate that it is at the moment, because they've been pretty consistent since the mid 2000s. The introduction of internet and smartphones didn't like accelerate it, but it has kept it going, obviously. So if things stay the same on the current trajectory, then this is what their future graph will look like population wise. I did not mark the current year 2026 because I'm trusting you guys are smart enough to know how numbers work and to be able to figure out that it's, right there just after 2025. So unless the trend changes or there's Somalia gets hit by an asteroid or something and there's some massive indent like there was back here during all the famine during the Civil War in the 90s, then this is what it would look like. Uh, Meanwhile, here, let me also show you. I told you about China's. So China's already on their way up and down, over and down, I mean. And so they're going to be dropping once they're in full curve by about 10 million plus per year. And I have them split here because this, I did blue based on them maintaining a fertility rate of roughly 1 or just under it. The red number is if they continue falling down and stopping around where uh, other East Asian nations seem to have established the Asian floor as being uh, Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, South Korea. The floor, for the most part, seems to be roughly around zero point 0.8 or just above or just below it. So if China goes all the way down there, then they're looking at more of this drop. But anyway, there's the showcase of the Max Ogier documents. What do we have? Uh, no, Israel would not be interested in NATO membership. They don't like playing according to rules. Turkey, Turkey is going to want out, but the method by which they enact that is yet to be determined. There's a few things they might try to go with to intentionally get themselves kicked, but uh, they probably, it looked like they were about to try some of those things initially, just like a year or two ago, but now it looks like they're gonna sit and wait for a moment to watch and wait for everything else to play out. Straw up here too, and then and especially they're probably also waiting for the China and Taiwan stuff as well, because they're now it kind of looks like their government wants to hang back just a bit and wait until this whole grand, I can't stretch over to Asia uh, and up here to this whole grand global revamping is mostly over. And then they might want to try some of the stuff that they want to try once they feel like everybody's tired enough. like a few years later. But that we'll have to wait and see. Let's see. Oh, we have a Trump cultist banned. Congratulations. But yeah, Turkey, one of the things Erdogan wants uh, is he kind of not so secretly wants the islands here that are at the moment owned by Greece. He kind of wants those and doesn't want Cyprus itself necessarily, but he kind of secretly wants it to not be a split and to be like completely northern Cyprus controlled. But he has also indicated, again, since people can never seem to differentiate this is not uh, Erdogan and the Turkish government is not the same thing as the people of Turkey. Same with every other country. He has kind of indicated, both through action and statements, that he would like uh, some portion, at the very least, of the prior Ottoman Empire. Predominantly, it seems he's most interested in the, oil heavy portions and of the specifically of Iraq, the portions in the north, which are some of the ones that have been touched the least. He also wants Turkish control over the Black Sea, or for Turkey to be the predominant power of the Black Sea, which he is going to get. He doesn't really even have to do anything in that regard, uh, because Russia is, self-destructing of its own doing and intent, and even post-war, uh, Ukraine is going to like entirely, for the rest of its existence, have everything it has constantly pinned and directed against any future renewed attempt from whatever version of Russia comes after this one. So Ukraine will have zero interest in competing for like ownership of the Black Sea. So in that regard, Erdogan is has fallen into a position of do nothing and win anyways. He's in the Black Sea regards, he's at this point going to actually just get the outcome that he wants. The other things, though, that he would like would involve having to fight NATO and or just Europe on its own. And over here, everyone's kind of eventually going to just let him quietly get away with doing whatever to Syria. If he goes too far south, though, then then Turkey and Israel are going to fight. In Iraq, uh, Israel would be fine with Turkey pushing down into Iraq slowly, eventually, whether directly via proxies or whatever have you. In this case, it's us that would have an issue with that, and that would eventually see a U.S. Turkey conflict predominantly within Iraq. But we've kind of also signaled the drift apart ourselves as well, as we have made it kind of clear that we're going to gradually be dipping out from our installations in Turkey, and almost certainly taking the nukes with us. But Turkey's going to be getting its own nukes anyways. They're on the list of countries that are after nukes. Uh, in light of how things have turned over the last 5 or 6 years, there is a growing list of countries that I can tell you point blank are going to get nukes or reacquire nukes, and or some others that, at the very least, will really want them and will at least try. Turkey is after nukes. Ukraine absolutely is going to redevelop nukes. Poland, I don't remember if they did yet. I think they already flat out publicly stated, yeah, we're going to make nukes. Finland's will probably be a bit quieter about it, but there's a fairly decent chance even Finland is going to get some nukes. Uh, a new version of Iran might still secretly want them, but a new version of Iran is going to not want to lose its sudden good terms and openness with the economic world at large. So they would probably, uh, somewhat begrudgingly, but they would probably stay away from them. The current administration in Iran, if it remained in power, would absolutely still keep pursuing nukes. Saudi Arabia has said that they want them. South Korea has already signaled that pretty definitively. Taiwan will probably stay quiet about it, even post war with China, whatever post war China ends up being. Taiwan will probably still stay quiet about it, but they're absolutely going to want them and could actually pretty easily make them on their own. Japan, maybe. I remember speaking about this last stream. Their government, when they held a discussion about it very recently, a very surprising number of their officials actually, it wasn't a vote on doing anything, it was just a like favorability uh test, said that they would actually be okay with the idea. Okay, and that's the spin-off from all of that. Did anything else come up? No, looks like that's the end. Is it the same here? Yes. All right. Looks like that's the end of everything then. So I'll give 30 seconds. You're lucky I know that you're trolling. No. No, Canada would not. They could, but they won't. Because even if what Trump cultists want happened and he became like immortal king emperor like Warhammer 40K, Canada knows that the US would immediately know if they were making them. And uh that would end up having the opposite effect then of being used as a precursor for some type of invasion and or annexation. But Canada indefinitely going forward, especially post Trump, is going to be relying on the military strategy that it has indefinitely relied on for decades and decades, which is that it doesn't really have to care about anything because, like the US, it's all the way over here, away from everybody. It supplies, natural resource wise, a lot of stuff to a lot of people who would not want that to get cut off. And also, if anybody did for some reason specifically go for Canada, even a negative attitude US as the current administration is, even a negatively attituded US would still immediately annihilate whoever that person was anyways, even purely on pragmatic grounds of defending Canada as a massive resource provider and economic partner. The same, literally the same goes for Mexico as well. Even if only based on proximity and pragmatism alone. And anyone who, for some reason, randomly decided they wanted to like cross the globe, cross cross these oceans to invade like in Mexico or Canada, even a negatively attituded or isolationist US would still engage and annihilate whoever that actor was anyways. I think, oh yeah, I do remember Brazil and Argentina at one point were both thinking of doing nukes like back in the 60s and 70s, but uh, they both ended up like not trusting themselves because of how whacked out and prone to downward spirals both their industries and their governments and political situations were as a whole. So it didn't work out for them in the long run, but also they both ended up kind of having to realize the fact that it was actually not in their own best interest because of how because of certain tendencies that they had. The former Argentinian dictator dude did really want them though. All right, that is going to be. Oh no, people are still asking stuff. African nations. South Africa had nukes at one point, but got rid of them. They kind of, uh, it, all, for one, the outbound white governments, once they were allowing black people to actually do things, didn't want them to fall into the hands of a potentially majority black government. And also, South Africa, although it wasn't as bad as it is now, was still economically just not there really. They were not in a position to maintain even a small nuclear arsenal. The most likely out of African countries would probably be Egypt, and then at a decently lower second place would probably maybe be Algeria. Uh, but neither of them are really in the best position to do that, both capability wise and economically, as Algeria is still a rising economy. They're not in a decent stage yet. And Egypt's economy has gone up and down and all wild over the place. And even a present government desiring or expecting itself to stay in power forever, probably I would say still wouldn't want to risk having nukes that would then be around and come into the hands of some government that came after them. But in terms of likelihood now, especially since South Africa doesn't really have the interest and is also no longer in the position to do it, Egypt would probably be on the table as the most likely and the one with the nearest capability of getting such. I don't. I really don't think anyone else on the continent is really either interested or could afford to make it happen. Like Nigeria could just afford to make it happen. However, they almost certainly would not because of the I'm just using the two rivers as an easy point to draw on, because of the divisions in the country and the constant issues in the north. The Nigerian government would not want to risk uh, actors or internal groups within their own government that they dislike getting hold of those. In Nigeria's case, it would not be a risk of them being used on anyone else. It would be like a risk of any particular ethnic group or party or bad actor group using them like within the country, or at the very least, using them as a threat to try to bend the will of the country itself internally. Okay, if that is it, now that we've gone almost 2 hours, which is over an hour longer than I was supposed to, then I'll probably end here. So I'll wait a few seconds for the transmission delay, even though the photons traveling across the seabed cables are moving at the speed of light, so that's almost instantaneous. The different servers and then sub-servers and local nodes they have to go through where the data is processed and directed, that takes at least a few milliseconds because that's a computer actually running and calculating stuff. And when you stack those up, that's where you get the stream delays from. 'Cause even on like Twitch streamers I watch, like Lobos or whoever. Wait, did we break the record? Wow, I was not even paying attention to that. That's the most people that were ever on the stream at one point, 36. The previous record was 28. But yeah, like I was saying, so even in the best cases, I think the delay is still like 3 to 5 seconds. But there's nothing else from anybody, so I'm going to get out.